First off, thank you everybody for making time today to join us. I know these are, crazy, uncertain times, and can be especially, daunting right now to be navigating a career search in the midst of everything else that's going on. So we wanted to put together this webinar as just one of many resources to help the UCLA veteran community navigate this process a little bit more smoothly, and just make everyone aware of some of the resources that are available to them. So there's a lot of info here to get through, as well as outside of this, and a lot of additional resources that we'll highlight at the end, to make the process more manageable. But today is just intended to be very high level overview, and there's a lot of, each of these sections could be, another month's worth of coaching and material. You can lean on your UCLA resources for one-on-one support that's really specific to you, which is of course the best option. But given the time today, I want to just cover some key topics that I hope you'll take away from this, and just hope that you'll continue to engage with the UCLA support structure to help you through this process. So first, I'd like to just introduce you to the team here that's helped to make this happen. First, I'll turn it over to Sia to introduce herself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Sia Ford, and I'm the Senior Director of Professional School and Affinity Programs. And one of the groups that we work with is the Veterans Alumni Network. And we work very closely with Emily Ives in the Veteran Resource Center. We are working with David Cooley, and there's the Anderson contingent. And we have a number of partners across the campus, and we welcome your interest or questions about the Veterans Network. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much, Evan, for your effort here.
Thanks, Sia. Justin?
Hi, everyone. I'm Justin Seiler. I work with Sia, so we're on the same team in Alumni Affairs. And I also, help support the Veterans Alumni Network. And everything Sia said, I echo. And if you're interested in getting involved in the network or joining our community of veteran alumni, we have, you can visit a website, the VetNet website, or if you're on UCLA One, we have a dedicated group for veteran alumni and students. But it is great to see all of your faces, and thank you to David and Evan for putting this together, and for Emily, and to Emily as well. But great to see you all, and I hope you're doing well.
Thanks, Justin. Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily Ives. I'm the Program Director for Veteran Services at UCLA, which includes our Veteran Resource Center. We're here to support students transition to campus, their experiences on campus, and help them with their transition off campus. And so really excited to be here, and very thankful to Sia, Justin, David, and Evan for all of their work putting this together and supporting our students and thinking about that next step after UCLA. And how they can prepare as a student or as an alum for that. And so just super thankful. Our Veteran Resource Center is here to support all military connected students. So whether the individual has served, is a dependent or spouse of someone who served, or is connected to the military in some way, we offer services to support you at UCLA and help you make the most of your experience. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to support you, and really thankful to be here. So thank you so much.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm David Cooley. I'm the Director of Alumni Career Services at UCLA Anderson, the Business School at UCLA. And the reason I'm here is for 8 years before I was in the role with Alumni Career Services, I was with the full-time MBA program. And during that time, we saw more and more veterans being admitted into Anderson. We were all very excited about it. But what we realized was just what a challenge that the veterans had translating that experience into the civilian world, and more specifically the business world. There were a number of events that the alums were, I should say the students were invited to as soon as school began. And so we started a program back in 2013 that really helped veterans, and one of whom is on today's call, in terms of translating that experience so it was much easier and more effective in the job search. So I had the good fortune of meeting Evan a few years after I left this role, and we got talking about how we could collaborate with the great UCLA team and the Veterans Resource Center, and that's what you're going to see today as a result of that, and kind of an intro to some things that you should really think about.
Excellent. Thank you again, Sia and Justin, for pulling this together. Emily, of course, is the key resource for all veterans on campus. She was the first person I was introduced to months before I even set foot onto campus back in 2015. So hugely grateful to everything that she does. And David has just been a great resource for me at Anderson and a good friend, and he's a phenomenal advocate for the veteran community. So appreciate it. My name is Evan. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, graduated from UCLA Anderson in the class of 2017, and wanted to put this on today because, I've been in the shoes of you all. So, been through this transition and have leaned heavily on the resources that UCLA has across the Anderson community and more broadly, as well as the other alumni across the network. And just passionate about helping out other veterans and kind of paying this forward. So based in St. Louis, Missouri, worked for a home care technology startup called Honor on their new market development team, and had the opportunity to move back home to the Midwest to continue my career. So happy to be coming to you from the central time zone today. So. All right, so what we're going to cover here, you've heard it before probably 100 times, that the veteran community has tremendous skill sets and experience that are hugely valuable to the civilian workforce. And that's real, of course. Pretty much every employer today acknowledges this. But the real challenge, as David alluded to, is making those skills and that experience translate effectively in a cohesive and really in a relevant way to potential employers so that they can clearly understand that specific value that you bring to their organization. So we'll talk through some of the key ways you can demonstrate that value. First, we'll talk through kind of the introspective work, the work of the self-assessment, then kind of how to leverage the network, how to craft that career narrative to demonstrate and highlight your value and your fit to the organization, and then just how to present your story on LinkedIn, through the interview process, on your resume, et cetera. Then we'll open it up to questions at the end. And of course, some resources, and I'll continue to be a resource for folks afterwards. So, the self-assessment piece, when most people think about the career search, they immediately think resumes, cover letters, interviews as kind of the key elements of this. But I would kind of argue that the first step, really before any of that begins, is to really do that introspective self-assessment work up front. Just like land navigation in the military, getting from point A to point B, first you need to know where you are on the map, then you can kind of figure out where it is that you're headed. So the first step is really just acknowledging that this is a process, right? The career search, like any other process, involves tangible steps that if you execute them correctly, they'll yield predictable results. And just like anything else, there are going to be setbacks, there's going to be rejection along the way, and that's really just part of the process. So kind of acknowledging that, and getting that mindset straight up front, I think is critical. It's not really so much the individual, action items, or resume, or the interview that tends to trip people up. It's really just more the behavioral elements of following through on this process, getting consistent on the schedule, putting in the time, kind of the discipline and accountability, setting clear, tangible goals, and then just putting in that time and effort every day or every week. To move towards the career objectives that you've got. And then of course, bouncing back from inevitable setbacks that are part of the process. So just getting organized, using your calendar, setting aside that structured career time, leaning on your resources, et cetera. Next is really starting to do that introspection to figure out where your existing strengths lie. There are a lot of self-assessment tools out there. You've probably heard of some of them. I highly encourage you to go out and do some of these. A lot of them can be found online either for free or for a nominal fee, or you can, a lot of times access them through the UCLA network. And 16 personalities and Myers-Briggs. You probably heard of some of these, the Big Five, Authentic Happiness. There are lots out there. And I would caution anyone against putting too much stock in the results of any one of these individual assessments. But I think they are good tools to kind of help people determine where their natural strengths are and kind of which direction that that they might orient their search. One of the tools that I really like on the career leader assessment is something called the career motivators. And it just helps out of a list of, I think, 13 different motivators, like lifestyle or the prestige of the role or the organization. Is it financial gain? or the ability to lead, continue leadership and managing others, autonomy, job security, et cetera, just kind of helps you rank for those and figure out what it is that you're really trying to optimize for from a life design standpoint. I think that level of introspection can really help guide that search so that you actually end up on a career path that you don't look back on and realize that you were kind of optimizing for the wrong things. Next is just doing that interest assessment, figuring out where those interests lie, because those are the areas that you'll be able to really develop your true passion. I'm, not necessarily one to say go follow your passion. If I did that, I'd probably be, a ski bum somewhere right now. But I do say follow your interests, and over time, those interests are likely to become your passion professionally. So, as those interests align with and overlap with your strengths, you're going to tend towards figuring out where that passion lies. One exercise for that is just, I call it the peak state exercise, but it's thinking back on your past work experience to times that you were really, in the zone, so to speak, or, what psychologists call in a state of flow or effortless productivity, where you were being challenged, fully engaged, maybe time seemed to be flying by. Your strengths and interests were totally aligned. And if you think back on what you might have been doing during that experience, then you can kind of project forward into how you can look to kind of replicate that in future professional experiences, some of those elements of the interests and the strengths that you were pursuing at that time. And it can also help to zero in on the job function or the specific industry that you're looking to target. And then kind of the third piece of the self-assessment component is really looking at mission and market opportunity. I think as veterans, we tend to, we all join the military for varying reasons, but we all generally are tied to a sense of mission, sense of purpose, service to others and to our country or community. And I think finding a similar sense of mission and purpose out in the civilian workforce is equally important. We hardly need to be reminded that the last several months the world has changed pretty dramatically, and it's going to continue to look different as we come out of this COVID crisis. So it's important to think about, what industries are set to do well through this, what innovation and positive things are going to come out of this, what opportunities are going to emerge. Obviously, lots of companies, are not hiring or laying people off, going through furloughs right now, but there are lists of a ton of phenomenal companies that are hiring and some great new innovation that's coming. So, this is kind of a framework that I like and turn to regularly, kind of to bring all three of these components together. The strengths, what inclinations, what areas are you naturally strong in, where if you continue to refine those skills, you can truly become world-class in that particular area. And then the interests, what areas pique your interest? Again, it's about finding that passion over time as you develop those interests further. And then the third piece, the mission, it a lot of times is framed as what drives your economic engine, but put more simply, what does the world need in this time, and how can you align with that sense of mission? So I find that kind of people who find and work at the intersect of those three dimensions tend to experience the greatest fulfillment in what they do. And they also tend to excel far beyond those who maybe operate out of alignment with those three dimensions. So that's the self-assessment part. But leveraging your network is probably the most important element to landing a great job, making that career transition effectively. A lot of times it's referred to as the hidden job market. Most jobs in reality are filled through personal connections and networks, not through online job postings. Just a couple of stats for you. 80% of jobs are never even posted online. And many of those that are outdated or already filled, or they're just, posted to fulfill a requirement, but really they already had the leading candidates in mind. 85% of professional level jobs are actually filled through those professional networks or personal networks. And yet a very small minority of total applicants for any given job actually comes through personal referrals. So competition is less when you come in through a network, and yet the success rate is much higher. So what that obviously means is, build and use your network. This is really the key tool to making that career transition. just submitting a bunch of resumes and applications online can feel productive, but without those personal contacts, it can really be kind of a low leverage activity. So,
and I'll just add to that. I think that we all, when we see jobs posted online, we know it's easy to access those opportunities, and we get a sense that that's all that's out there. Because whether it's LinkedIn or one of the job boards, there's this tendency to believe that that all you'll see, all that's available is there. Leveraging your network, as we'll get into, is so critical, and it doesn't have to be as difficult as people think it is. In other words, we all have existing networks. It isn't about going to an event. It's not about necessarily like a networking event. It might be, but more often it's just reaching out to people that you have some shared background with. Maybe you were from different years at UCLA. Maybe you were both in the Marines. There's a lot of ways to look at what are your networks, and we can talk about that later on. But I think the thing to think about is really, don't be lulled into a sense of believing that what's online will define any company and what's there. By the time, as Evan said, by the time most things are posted, they're kind of old news. So it becomes critical to find a way to build those relationships to access the jobs that will never see the light of day.
Yep, absolutely. And the applicant tracking system, ATSs, that are on the back end of these job portals are designed to keep people out, as they say. It's really the people who are the ones who are going to open the doors and bring people in. So, the key is to finding those key people. So, as David said, what's the best way to do this? There are tools to kind of build structure around this. In business school, they encourage building a network tracking sheet, which is a list of companies and roles that you can get excited about, and really being able to study and learn more about those companies in kind of an organized way, and then identifying the key people in your first, second, and third degree contacts at those companies that you can look to network with to conduct those informational interviews. The first degree contacts are the people that you know directly, but it's really a lot of times those second and third degree connections that open up a whole world of opportunities and a network that isn't immediately available to you. Most of your friends are, kind of have the same network as you, but it's their friends in that second and third degree that really expands that out exponentially. So really looking for ways to get those introductions and find those key people that you can conduct that informational interview with and ask for 15 or 20 minutes of their time to learn more about their career path, their role, etc. As David said, figuring out those identity groups, whether it's from your military branch, that's a great place to start. Obviously, you're talking about thousands, tens of thousands of people who would be more than willing to lend you a hand, and of course, make that intro or lend 15 or 20 minutes of their time. But of course, your friends, you can look back to high school contacts, people that you haven't talked to in years, but if you've got a professional overlap and you see they're doing something interesting, I've had many occasions where I've been able to reach out and reestablish those relationships that I hadn't tapped into or been in touch with for a long time. So just thinking about all the ways that you can expand that network and developing a cadence around the outreach, the number of informational interviews that you'll set up, the number of networking events that you're going to attend. Of course, it's more about quality of touch points than quantity at any point, but it's important to just kind of continue to tap into this network and make gradual progress.
And Evan, I'll just throw in this, what we talked about earlier in terms of LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, you definitely want to be on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has hundreds of millions of members. And what does that mean to you? It means that probably you have access to somebody, whether it's from your existing network or even somebody you're reaching out to cold, in a way that you wouldn't if you never used the tool. And LinkedIn, not just for business school, but really for anybody targeting any type of role, is so critical, because without it, how do you really find people in organizations? How do you really understand who's who in an organization? So if you're not comfortable with LinkedIn, you might want to take some classes. I know that recently UCLA Alumni Association did a great webinar, and they talked about the importance of LinkedIn. It's really important, and especially to veterans. It's a great way to either reconnect with people or really identify new contacts. And so I would just try to get familiar with the UCLA alumni page, even search within there for other veterans, and you're going to be surprised how quickly you can get at contacts at companies that you're interested in.
Absolutely. And we'll talk through kind of how to build out the LinkedIn profile and sort of the anatomy of that. But another opportunity is something called just micro networking, which is just little touch points, whether it's endorsing a friend or a former colleague for some skill, somebody that you used to work with, that you know they're a strong public speaker or a great leader, going in and just endorsing them, commenting on somebody else's LinkedIn post or article. Those things matter because they get you out there and they get you seen and just start to build that engagement with the broader community. So would definitely encourage that as an approach as well. So the next thing to be thinking about is really crafting your narrative. This is your story. It's about telling your military story in a way that resonates with companies. There's an example here, kind of a fill in the blank career narrative that essentially tells what you've done, where you're headed, and why those skills make you the ideal person for the role that you're headed into. You really want to position your military service as a key part of your experience and part of your identity, something that's given you key skills that make you a great fit for that future role. But you want to avoid making that your entire identity. That is part of who you are. It's a critical part of who you are and what you've done, but it's not all that you are. You want to really maintain that future focus on how those skills are going to translate to wherever you're headed next, whatever that key role is next. So people really want to hear that story. They're interested in what you've done, but it always needs to come back to how is this relevant for them, for that company, for that team. And just don't make them make that leap, essentially. Don't force them to make that translation between being a fire team or a squad or a platoon leader on a patrol to leading a sales team to hit key objectives. Make that leap for them. A lot of those skills certainly will translate. Spell it out. Don't expect that they're going to be able to, just because you have that leadership experience, you have that experience, hitting key milestones, key objectives. You really need to think about, what it is that they're looking for in that ideal candidate. Just one other little example with regard to LinkedIn, that profile picture. This is, a little thing, but it shouldn't be you in your military uniform. It should be you, again, focused on the future in a professional attire that matches the industry that you're going into. And then lastly on this, just be authentic. You want to be specific and relevant on the value that you're going to bring, and only you can bring to that role. But if you're putting on an act, it's going to show and people are going to see through it. So you certainly need to practice your narrative. You need to practice your story. Give it a lot of thought, but really with the ultimate goal of just being the most authentic and true reflection of who you are. So how do you demonstrate that value specifically? Well, companies are typically screening for 3 primary things when they're looking for candidates. You can break it down to the what, the why, and the how. The what is the skill set. As I mentioned, it's the what will you do for them? Can you clearly demonstrate your ability to do the work? Do you have the skills that are necessary? Or do you have the ability to learn those required skills? It may require you going out and leveling up, taking additional certifications, just showing your specific knowledge and expertise in that arena. And this is back to where the strengths portion of that self-assessment really ties in and comes into play. The second piece is the why, and this is really the mindset, your motivation to pursue the specific role. And this is where that career narrative we talked about comes into play. That story, it should make sense to the hiring manager. It should really be kind of a direct path from one step of your life and career into the other. And it's also where those interests and where that mission and purpose from the self-assessment exercises come into play, because your enthusiasm for the role that you're looking at should be crystal clear to the interviewer by the way that you talk about it, by the excitement you have, by the why behind that. And then finally, the how. This is about fit within the organization, and arguably this may be one of the more, if not the most important part of it. It seems kind of the squishiest of the three, but it's really about likability at the end of the day. This could be the make or break when everything else is kind of decided. In recruitment for consulting, it's a lot of times called the airport test. Would I want to be stuck on a 4-hour layover with this person? That may not be as relevant with travel these days, but would I want to be stuck for 4 hours with this individual? And do we have common interests? Do we have mutual contacts, et cetera? Finding that commonality is really important. And then just on that note, the follow-up, the simple customs and courtesies that we're used to in the military are important. Have you followed up quickly and thoughtfully? Have you sent those thank you notes after the interview? We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but those things matter. And again, they may be the key factor that really makes the decision. So. All right, and finally, this is about presenting your story. As we talked about, LinkedIn is hugely important. How do you showcase your narrative and present all the work that you've done, both introspectively and as you've shaped your career and your skill sets through UCLA? How do you effectively showcase this narrative to potential recruiters and employers? Thankfully, for me at least, LinkedIn is gradually, or maybe not so gradually, taking the place of the resume or the traditional resume for job applications. For the role I'm in now, I was never even asked for my resume. They just looked at my LinkedIn profile. They saw everything they needed to see. And through the interview process, they never even wanted to see a paper resume, which was surprising. But, almost every company, 95% today, use LinkedIn to recruit. So of course, you still need a well-crafted resume. You still need to go through all the tedious revisions to refine that. But your LinkedIn should really tell the whole story. And just another note, LinkedIn Premium is free for veterans for a year. So if you don't already have an account, it gives you a lot of additional access and visibility. So definitely encourage you to sign up. Just Google LinkedIn for veterans. The page should come up. I think you need your military ID or a DD-214 to just verify your military history, and then you can qualify for that 1-year free premium account. And then, this may be a statement of the obvious, but it bears repeating, be careful with social media accounts. Hiring managers will do their digging. They will look through past pictures, tweets. They want to learn as much as they can about you if you're the one who's going to be, working side by side into the future. So inappropriate content, offensive content, hopefully it's not there to begin with, but of course that's going to be an automatic red flag. So just go through, scrub all your accounts, look back to even those pictures from college or high school. At the very least, make sure your privacy settings are turned all the way up. I mean, this is a simple thing, but don't let it be the factor that DQs you, and you wouldn't even know why, because there's some poor judgment or mistake from years ago that's hanging out there. All right, so just quick overview of kind of the anatomy of your LinkedIn page. And this is Stephen Brightman, who helped us put on a similar workshop like this in conjunction with the VA last summer. And he generously allowed us to use his page as kind of the epitome of a well-crafted LinkedIn page. So your picture, as I mentioned, should be formal. It should reflect the industry that you're recruiting for. Your tagline is very important. That may be the only thing, as people do searches for candidates that have a specific role, that may be the first or the only thing that they look at. So that's hugely important. The location listed should match, of course, where you are or where you're planning to recruit for. But that's also something that folks will look for. And then your summary. That's your narrative statement. It should be your kind of elevator pitch that you've crafted and we've talked about previously. You know, a thoughtful demonstration of how your past skills really translates into the roles that you're looking to transfer or transition into. Little things like the background picture, these are nice to haves. You know, it should be professional, reflect maybe the industry that you're going into or something about your identity. And then connections. You know, this is more practical than it is an optics thing, but you want to connect with, you know, as many people as possible. You shouldn't just send out random connections to people that you don't actually know, but you do want to go back and thoughtfully expand your network, because that just generally, you know, expands your visibility from others, from companies, as well as your visibility into the broader recruiting network. All right. You know, and then you get into the specific roles. Of course, they should match your resume. You don't need to put every specific job, you know, or bullet from your resume onto your LinkedIn page. You want to make sure it's fairly concise. It should look neat, but it should be your general job descriptions kind of laid out. Again, going through and circling, or even better, having somebody else circle any military term, any jargony word. You know, we get so used to all these terms: platoon, squad, unit, mission, whatever it is. You know, you want to find replacements for each one of those, so that you can really make that make sense to the civilian observer. Right. Then a few other just kind of detail points. Of course, your education, you want that to be up to date, reflecting both any past education as well as in progress. Degrees that you're pursuing should reflect your resume. You don't want to put all of your military training on there. A lot of that doesn't necessarily translate over. Some licenses, certifications may be relevant. Six Sigma, for example, certain things actually are well respected and recognized on the civilian side. But I would say most military training and certifications probably don't transfer effectively onto the civilian side. And then, you know, another nice to have is any volunteer experience, especially those where you've held leadership roles. You want to just highlight that for recruiters. Skills, again, these are nice to have. They can be used as recruiters are conducting searches for specific skill sets. So, you know, you can add those in, but again, a nice to have, not necessarily required. Same thing with the recommendations. Oh, did I just lose you there? All right. Can you still see the screen? Had a little technical glitch. All right.
Feel good.
Perfect. Same thing with your interests. These can be useful to sort of, again, find that commonality with your interviewers as you're looking around and setting up those informational interviews. Look at things that they follow, you know, articles or postings that they may have had, trying to find that, that commonality to build rapport with people. All right, so the resume piece. This, of course, is a tedious process and one that really requires a lot of outside eyes, really leaning on your friends, your colleagues, the UCLA Career Center to really support you with that. But as I mentioned, removing military jargon is key. You know, going through, Google is a great resource for figuring out how, you know, if there's a word that you're not quite sure how to best translate it. Subordinate should be policies and guidelines. Going through and just, you know, scrubbing for all the military jargon that may be in there. And then each bullet in your past experience should follow what's called the SAR model: situation, action, result. Or sometimes you hear this framed as situation, task, action, result, STAR. But it should, you know, essentially frame very succinctly what the context was, and then what specific action that you conducted in that achievement, and then really highlighting and emphasizing the most the result. You know, what the the impact was on that organization. And as much as possible, you want to quantify those results. You really want every bullet. This can be challenging because the military isn't necessarily, you're not necessarily dealing with revenue figures all the time, but you can find ways to figure out, the value of the account or the equipment that you were managing, or just the number of individuals in your unit that you were leading. All of those things matter and really should be incorporated. And then presenting your story, of course, the interview process. In this COVID-19 climate, but even prior to, and certainly as we continue to move out of this, virtual interviews are going to continue to be commonplace. So just getting comfortable with Skype, with Zoom interviews, whatever the medium is, you should be comfortable getting on there and conducting those interviews virtually. So I would say practice with friends, curate your setup. Maybe you don't necessarily have to have a blank wall behind you, for example. Maybe put a picture on the wall that makes for an interesting story, something that can help you connect with the interviewer. But those little things can be important. And of course, preparing for the key questions. The main question that you'll almost always get is to tell me about yourself. Or walk me through your resume is another way that may be framed. But that should be a well-practiced, about 1.5 to 2 minute overview of your experience and that narrative that we've already talked about. Really emphasizing why you are the right fit for this role. Usually they'll start off the interview with some version of that question. And as with anything, the beginning and the end are the most memorable portions of any interaction. So, you really want to make sure that this is well practiced, well rehearsed, and very specific to that particular role. Other common interview questions, you can find lots out there. I'm happy to share a list of other common sort of behavioral interview questions. There's also, of course, the more case style interviews as well, but you'll typically get things along the lines of why this company, why this role, why you. And again, that ties right back to the narrative piece, what your strengths are, what your interests are, how your kind of mission and objectives tie specifically to this company and this role. Other common questions: what are your biggest strengths, biggest weaknesses? What would a friend say are your biggest weaknesses? There are lots of different versions of those. I'm sure David of questions that you can prep and drill with your friends or colleagues. And then preparing insightful questions for the interviewer, for the company. And this really comes down to doing your homework up front, doing your research. Again, this is likely to come at the end with the kind of asking you what other questions you have for them. They're likely going to remember this part of the interview, this dialogue, more than anything, because this is what they're going to walk away from you with top of mind. So these questions for them should be, interesting info that you can't just research on their website. It should be things that lead to interesting conversation, something that, of course, they will know something about, something that showcases your specific knowledge of the industry or that market, and things that show the specific skills or the expertise that you have. Not every question is going to have all of those factors, but you do want to really spend time to thoughtfully craft those questions, because they're really going to lead to a dialogue and more engagement at the end. And you want your interviewer to walk away saying, man, I'd love to continue this conversation for another hour and just, learn more about how insightful this person is and all the ways that they've already thought about this industry or this job.
And Evan, I just want to build on that. These questions, as Evan is saying, are critical because they not only show that you did your homework, which of course you do, studying a company or the people ahead of time, but they show a certain commitment that through the interview process that you really want this job because you've already thought through the problems that the person in this job will solve ultimately. So if you've thought through these questions that Evan's referring to, they're going to be more likely to see you as someone that's a good fit. They're going to see your mindset, How do you solve problems? It's why they ask all these questions. They seem just sometimes absolutely annoying. How many times people will say behavioral questions. Tell me about a time that you failed. Tell me about a time that you had to make a difficult decision without enough data. And you think, wow, why are they putting me on the spot like this? But they're trying to see how your mind works. They want to see if you can fit, if you're likable and that you can confidently solve problems or lead projects. So there's a lot that goes into this. So I just wanted to underscore how important this part is and what a differentiator it really is. Evan, I think you'll agree that not enough people that are pursuing roles really think through this part.
Totally. And again, it's really what can build that rapport and that sense of fit, through it. It may end up being half the interview, or half the duration of it. And again, could overshadow some answer that you weren't quite on point on earlier in the interview. That stuff, because it was in the middle, is likely to kind of fade away. But it's that, tell me about yourself, that first impression that you make, and then where you leave it, that end conversation, that are really going to stick in the mind of that interviewer and leave the biggest impression. And then finally, we talked about it before, but the follow-up is hugely important. These are the little things. They're simple, but they're also just as simple to forget. And so a lot of people won't do them. But sending the thank you note, being thoughtful, it should be brief, but it should reinforce your enthusiasm for the role. It should reference maybe a highlight from the interview or something that you learned, or just remind them of something that you discussed that you found particularly interesting. But put some thought into those. Those should not be copy and paste jobs. That you might have a skeleton for them that is fairly standard, but they should definitely be customized to that interview. All right. And with that, I know we flew through a lot there and kept it, fairly high level. There are a ton of resources, and I'll be happy to share this deck here because there is just a lot more to dive into. There are lots of companies that have amazing veteran hire programs, Amazon, Google. There are other specific programs like Vet Tech geared towards, teaching programming skills and using that GI Bill for additional certifications. Rocking Your Resume is a workshop that UCLA has put on that there are videos of how to really craft that resume and that story effectively. Talked about LinkedIn Premium for veterans. LinkedIn Learning is another great tool to be able to kind of level up specific skill sets. So got links to all of those, and there are tons more out there. So happy to be a resource, but definitely look at some of these because they're there to help us and our community. So take advantage of them. So with that, happy to turn it over to questions and kind of open it up.
Looks like we have some questions in the chat. Do you accept connections from people that you don't know? Evan, why don't you go to that one first, and I'll give you my opinion. We may have a slight difference of opinion here.
Sure. Do I accept connection from people I don't know? It depends. It depends on if it was thoughtfully, you should always include a message of some sort if you have something interesting to say. Certainly don't just connect to somebody to solicit or make an ask without, having something to offer or something interesting. But I will occasionally, personally, I will accept if I find that there's something common that's interesting about that person, or maybe we have mutual connections, that there's a reason that this person is interested in getting in touch with specifically me versus just trying to blast a bunch of people.
Yeah, and I would agree. And the same goes for the other side, right? Which is when you're reaching out to someone and you have some shared background, maybe it's that you're both in the Army or you're both Marines. Maybe that plus you both went to UCLA, but you're 20 years apart. Think through what that common ground can be. That's why we all are such believers in LinkedIn, even though it's boring. It's not the most exciting social network to use initially, right? Instagram and Snapchat, and these are, Facebook, of course, are a lot more visually driven, but LinkedIn has not only such great ways to find access to other people within your networks, but the algorithms, it gets to learn you over time, who you are over time, and the type of jobs you're interested in, and the type of news stories that you're interested in. So it becomes more and more of a helpful tool the more that you get to use it. So I would say connect with people if you think they have value. It's if they start to oversell you or annoy you, it's very easy to unfollow them and block them. So I tend to err on based on my personality as an extrovert. The nature of what I do is to be a little forgiving, but when somebody reached out to me last Sunday to try to sell me something, I did have to unfollow and block that person, but it was very easy to do it. So I think it's your comfort level. What you say, Evan?
Absolutely. Yep.
And let's see, David Olson says that he doesn't usually, unless connected to someone. Okay, so yeah, it's a matter of personal opinion. I think it is based on where you are in the process. For example, if you're just about to earn your degree at UCLA or UCLA Anderson, you're probably a little bit more open. One thing also to realize, and you know this, Evan and Emily and I talked about this a few weeks ago as well, Sia and Justin, is the number of veteran recruiters, as Evan referred to, at certain companies. Microsoft, for example. Emily and I were talking about a great guy. I believe his name is it Emily? Is it Joe Walsh? I'm forgetting, but he's always been an advocate. I met him at a bunch of veterans resource conference. And if you do enough searching on LinkedIn, you're going to find not just veteran-friendly recruiters, but actual recruiters that were probably veterans themselves. Those won't be the only people that will bring you in. But it certainly helps to have those recruiters on your radar in the beginning. Would you say, Evan?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just, again, you'd be hard pressed to find any veteran, especially in your same branch of service, who's worth his or her salt, who wouldn't be open to having a discussion. Everybody's busy. Everybody's got, got their career and priorities, but they'll make the time. There was another Marine that I saw the other day on LinkedIn who had posted an article that I just came across as I was looking through LinkedIn. There's an article and then a video that he posted that I just really liked. It kind of spoke to me. It resonated with me. So I sent him a message, said, hey, I'd love to just be connected with you because I love what you're putting out there and would love to just see more of it. And he totally appreciated that. He thanked me and he replied and of course accepted my connection. So just be authentic, be interesting, be interested. Of course, that's where you're likely to find those real connections is if you're just interested in learning more about others.
And so now you've got this new connection. Earlier, Evan, you talked about these second degree and third degree connections. So important. And I think in your resources, you talk about the book called Friend of a Friend by David Burkus. And it's a book that I know you and I both like quite a bit because it talks about, as you said earlier, that the people that are used to you, I should say used to, they're in that first degree, you probably already tapped them out. But those that are 1 or 2 degrees, not only are open to probably hearing more about you, but they have huge networks themselves. And so, for example, Evan connecting to this person that's also a veteran online means that both of their networks got a little bit bigger. And quite often, you'll find that people that don't even know you well at all, if you make a great impression on them, will go to bat for you if you're grateful for their time. And the importance of building relationships, as Evan talked about, I don't think we can underscore enough. The relationship isn't going to come into fruition right away, but it's about building trust and likability with both the companies and also the people in your network, so they will go to bat for you, and so you'll go to bat for them. Evan, do you remember any stories during your time at Anderson where some folks that didn't know you all that well went to bat for you, partially because you were a veteran?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly there's the entire Anderson community was hugely veteran supportive. That's something that I picked up on, and one of the big reasons that I really targeted UCLA specifically. But yourself, Emily Taylor, the entire community has been extremely supportive and wants to help out, wants to make those connections. Every time I would walk into Emily Taylor's office, she would give me a list of 20 people that she wanted to introduce me to, and she would make that mutual connection. Say, hey, Evan's a fellow Marine, you need to talk to him, and would make that intro. So just kind of using those first degree contacts to make those introductions, and expanding out that network. So it's amazing what you can do and the people you can reach with just 1 or 2 degrees of connection. So.
People don't believe it, I think, until they actually benefit from it. Yeah. And they reach out to a few people. It's a little nerve-wracking in the beginning, especially if you're a little bit more introverted. Even as an extrovert, I have to sit there and pause sometimes and say, am I going to offend this person if I reach out? I just need this, but they might find this a little annoying. I think more often than not, if your approach, as you said earlier, is one that is appreciative and you seem to have done some research on that person, the company, and you found that connecting point, it's going to help expand your network, and you're going to have a new, if not just a new contact, a contact that may eventually lead to an advocate that's going to help your career in some way. And ideally, you'll be able to help them with something back as well. It really is about give and take.
Totally. Here's an example. David, your friend Marshall Goldsmith, who's an author, I'd read his book and absolutely just was totally into it. Love this guy. Wanted to just hear him speak, learn everything about this guy. And it turned out David knows him, and made reference David in an outreach that I made, and he responded immediately. He was in the Gulf, I think he was in the Emirates, and replied right away and said, happy to be connected. Let me know what I can do for you. He also was tied to UCLA, so he just never. Yeah, he was in a PhD program, I think, through the Anderson School. So
that's very kind, and I think people like that. Marshall has written about 30 books, executive coach and PhD from Anderson, but it's the goodwill, right? That you reached out to me, you saw me out once, and we've developed a friendship and a working relationship with the veterans community just based on our initial running into each other, right? And so I think that the power of these relationships can't be understated enough, whether it's, like you said, reaching out through LinkedIn or just bouncing some ideas off people, learning something about a company by reaching out to a fellow Bruin or a fellow Anderson alum, a fellow Marine veteran, or wherever. And there's so many opportunities. Evan, are there some that you would recommend personally that you think are especially good for the different branches of the service?
Interesting. I'd need to give that a little bit more thought. There are some specific programs, but I do think most of them are pretty widely applicable. Rally Point is a great network broadly. There's Team Rubicon. There's a lot of organizations that have kind of formed specifically recruiting veterans that are founded by veterans. I'm into the kind of startup community, so looking at startups specifically that are veteran owned and founded, and those folks are looking to recruit specifically other veterans, and there tends to be branch loyalty for sure. I'm obviously gonna go to my Marines first, and it's an instant connection to any of them, no matter where in the world they are, like the one I mentioned earlier. So I think that I would go to your branch first, and there certainly are subgroups within each of the different services. Yeah.
So true, so true. Well, I can say, I don't know if there's any other questions. Evan has done so much for UCLA, the other workshop that we did. We want to be a resource to whether you were at this call today or if you see a recording of this later on, know that UCLA and Emily and Sia and Justin and the whole UCLA community really values your service. And Gene Block, everyone that and have met along the way, really want to root for you and know that you've got a lot of networks to pull from. So Evan, I want to thank you for what you've been able to do here. I don't know if there's any other questions. If not, thoughts from Justin, Sia, Emily?
You know, I posted a question to Evan, and I meant to do it to everybody. It was from a vet who asked me, trying to answer questions, but he had said, what if I don't get a bite? I'm not getting a bite. Would I look at my resume? Would I look at what would you suggest, Evan? He's discouraged, and so I'm sorry he's not on the call. That would have been on the Zoom. That would have been helpful, of course, but
Yeah.
I believe he's working.
You're not getting any.
Absolutely. And you know, that's a great question, because that's something that everybody has and the setbacks along a lot of rejection. And those are just learning points. That's where you refine your approach and look for, you know, where you may have positioned something wrong. But the best way to do that, to really zero in on what that is, as I mentioned, you know, looking for support, you know, asking the experts. We've got, just being part of the UCLA community, we have absolute world-class career resource options and folks available to us. So leaning on those, having them, asking for the time that they'll set aside and look at your resume, look at your LinkedIn, practice an interview with you. You know, these are all things that folks want to do, especially for the veteran community. Tap into that goodwill a little bit, because it's there and waiting. And don't count on yourself. None of us do it alone. We all do it, you know, with the support of everybody around us. And so, you know, the best way to do that is to just get second and third and fifth and 10th opinions on things.
Absolutely. It's something to add to that too, is someone's not getting a bite. There could be a lot of things at play here. One of them is if someone applies for a job or they're reaching out, it doesn't mean that they're not of interest to the other person. It may have not come up on the radar yet. They applied for a role. The person on the other side may have had a 2-week window of accepting resumes, and they'll get to it when they get to it. So not hearing back and not getting a bite could just be the person hasn't had a chance to really look through resumes or look through who reached out. But it's also one of these things that, given the current situation with so many people working, all of us working from home, a lot of things are delayed and staggered. So I wouldn't necessarily think that means anything if you're not getting a bite. It could mean that you want to, as Evan said earlier, take a more personal approach where you reach out perhaps to a recruiter and say, I'm sure you've had a lot of people already apply for this role. I hope you don't mind me reaching out individually, but I'd love to tell you about how I can add value, how I can contribute. Evan mentioned that earlier, the importance of talking about your ability to contribute, not what you want. And what we all want is important to us, but it's so important that in our narrative, in our resume, in our LinkedIn profile, everything we talked about today, that we talk about the ability to contribute to a company's goals or institution's goals. And once you've done that and you've thought through what that translation is, your odds are going to go up. And sometimes it's about polite persistence. The first time they don't get back to you, the second time they don't. There's an Anderson alum that is a dear friend of mine as well, who applied to Google 25 times over a couple-year period. Evan, you know the story.
Yeah.
And he kept getting turned down. He said, I really think I'd be a great fit for Google. Cut to finally, they said, hey, you keep applying here. Why do you keep applying? And he said, because I know your products inside and out. I know this in all the things that were big, like say 2009, 2010. Then they started bringing him in. Long story short, he's been at Google now for 8 years, and they had, until this happened, they were flying him all over the world. But it's about something that you learn in all the branches of the military is persistence and resilience. And add to that your skill set, your mindset, your likability. As Evan said earlier, it makes a difference. People want to work with smart people that they think can create value. And your background as a veteran or anything, any branch of the service is what you make of it as long as you can translate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just
Thank you.
add, don't hesitate to ask for feedback too. You won't always get it from hiring managers or recruiters. They won't necessarily have the time or be willing to devote the time to giving you, constructive feedback on what you could have done better. But I think it's worth asking, as you go through the process so that you can zero in on some of the specific things. But just try not to internalize it too much, because it's most often factors that, yes, we could always improve our approach, but there are probably factors that, either weren't in our control or that we're, not going to be able to necessarily control for. But, just trying to lean on the support of others to figure out what those things that you can do better are. But again, can't emphasize enough that, don't expect that the veteran experience in and of itself will get you in the door anywhere. It is going to get people a look, but again, it has to be a no-brainer, because hiring managers essentially are trying to de-risk this process for them and for their company, right? They want the person, if I'm, a VP of marketing or sales, I want the person who's going to make our team rock solid and going to be the perfect person to fill that gap that I need to fill. I'm not just going to hire somebody just because, I feel like they're a veteran and they have an interesting story. They need to be that perfect person. And I want them to go back and say, you won't believe how ideal this candidate is. Oh, and by the way, all that stuff I said that he or she did was in combat or was on an aircraft carrier in the Pacific. I mean, it should be and statement. It should be icing on the cake, but it shouldn't be the why. The why needs to be because you are, that ideal person for that role.
Thank you, Evan. The other question that they asked was, because people, I guess, are so busy, if they have to choose having a mentor or doing intense networking, is there a preference? I mean, that was not my question, that was theirs. Do you have a recommendation there?
David, you want to start that one, and then I'm happy to chime in.
Sure, I would say both, really. I mean, Evan said it earlier, you can't get there alone. None of us can. In fact, Marshall, I think is one of his books is called You Can't Get There Alone, or it certainly is something that if you have a mentor, the mentor is going to be incredibly valuable and help bring that perspective. I think we all have a lot of formal and informal mentors, but the networking piece is critical to get advocates and to get information and insights and build those relationships. And it's that credibility that's going to help you get hired, right? So I would say it's not either or, it's really both. Evan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. And you hate to give the both answer if you're looking for, clear-cut direction, but I'm a big advocate of mentorship. I think that, I thrive in more of a one-on-one setting, and I love, lending, sort of passing forward or paying forward what I've learned to others. And a lot of people feel that way. So definitely, finding a set of mentors at different steps of the career path, somebody who's maybe just a few years ahead of you, who you call every month or every 2 months. I've got a call next week with a UCLA undergrad who's getting ready to graduate. And we're about to have a career-related discussion next Tuesday. Similarly, I lean on folks like David and then other people that I've met along my UCLA path for one-on-one feedback and guidance at various inflection points. But the networking has to be continuous. And it can be as easy as just spending a little bit of time every day doing one or two meaningful touch points on LinkedIn, going to one networking event a week. I mean, we've got time for it. It's just a matter of, as I said at the beginning, really kind of building that structure, building that schedule around dedicated time for, career-related activities.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you.
Any other thoughts or questions? And by the way, I wanted to shout out to Julie Sina too for all that she's done, and your whole crew. You got a great crew with the alumni group there.
Thank you, David. I'll pass that on.
Please.
Will do.
Any last concerns?
Back at you, pal. From her. She respects our partnership a lot.
Well, yeah, maybe this is a time to wrap up a little early, but just to reinforce all that, first of all, Evan has done. I'm just so lucky to have met Evan. Evan has driven a lot of this programming, the career coaching work that I've done over the years. I certainly have enjoyed seeing people become more and more successful and know that the journey is really tough. And Evan and I, when we first met, started talking about the journey that the veterans have that's unique, and certainly that led to the conversations with all of you as well. But it is such an asset. And I think all of us, and Evan, please let me know, I always know that your time in the service is valued. Sometimes it just takes a while to translate it, like you did in that slide.
Right, right. I also want to add that you all spent such dedicated time on this. We've been developing this for quite a while, and then there was the interruption of the COVID, and then we picked it up again, and you just stayed with us on this. It's so important, and it can live on the website too. It's a wonderful thing. Just like the rock in your profile that Sean Landreth did. There's value for that. We don't even know how many people come and touch that, and it helps them. And so I just really thank you. I know you all are very, very busy, and I know you love the veteran audience and are dedicated, but we really appreciate it so much from the association and on behalf of VetNet.
Absolutely. Well, thank you to Sia and Justin and Emily and David for helping pull this together. As I mentioned at the beginning, I want to continue to be a resource for the UCLA veteran community. So don't hesitate to reach out by email. We will share as many of these resources as we can out more broadly to folks who are interested. So just reach out. This is just scratching the surface. There's a lot on each of these sections that we can dive deeper into to really help refine each element of this process. So just lean on this community.
Wonderful. Thanks
you again. And as you get a better and better idea, and this is such a strange time, what veterans need, let's reconnect from time to time. And again, Evan, I appreciate your friendship and your partnership on this. He's always quick to jump in and say, let me know what I can do. And so I appreciate that. And Sia and Justin, Emily and Julie, and let's make this an ongoing dialogue. And when we have an opportunity, we'll schedule other workshops like this, since Evan is in St. Louis and is fairly late there at this point. We'll let him go, but thanks to all of you, and let's keep moving forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Evan.
you. Thank you, Evan.
Amazing
Good night,
job.
Evan. Thank you,
Thank you,
Emily,
guys.
also. Talk to you soon, David.
Talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.